I shot footage of a Bigfoot on a logging road in the North Cascades last summer. Not trail camera footage harvested by someone else, not blurry footage from far away, showing an ambiguous shape in the trees. This is clear footage from maybe 30 yards out, recorded on professional equipment with good optics. And what I recorded is something I still can't quite explain, even after spending 2 years thinking about it. The footage exists. It's in a secure location. It's been reviewed by people who know what they're looking at. And what we're looking at is absolutely clear once you understand what to look for. Before we get into the detailed account, before we get into what happened after, let me know where you're watching from and if you've had an encounter like this. If you've seen something in the forest that didn't have a simple explanation. I want to hear about it. I work in forestry management for the State Department of Natural Resources. Been doing it for 16 years now. Started out of college with a degree in forest science, worked in timber cruising when I was young and didn't know what else to do with myself. Moved up to timber marking, and eventually landed in my current position in forest health assessment. The job title sounds more impressive than the actual work. It's not glamorous. It's honest labor, mostly involving long walks through remote forest, with a lot of standing in one place, looking up at trees, taking GPS coordinates, taking photographs for documentation, analyzing tree health and stand structure. There's a lot of data collection involved and a lot of report writing afterward. Seasonal work means summer months in the field doing physical assessments and winter months in the office, processing the data I've collected, preparing reports for the agency, managing the GIS databases. But it pays decently, and it keeps me outside in actual wilderness, which has always been my preference. I'd rather work outdoors in cold rain than sit in a cubicle in artificial lighting. My name is not important for this story. The agency doesn't know I'm talking about any of this. They don't know what I found in those forests. And they're probably better off not knowing, to be honest. For the purposes of this story, let's say I'm Dale. That's close enough to my real name that it feels authentic to me when I'm telling this, but different enough that if someone tries to track down the identity of the person making this report, they won't have a perfect match to work with. I've learned to be cautious about precision like that. The area I work is called the Concrete Darrington Administrative Unit. It's part of the State Department of Natural Resources Management lands in Washington, roughly 4,000 acres, split between state-managed timberland and Forest Service acreage in Skagit County, north of Mount Baker and east of the Baker Lake Reservoir. It's rugged country, very steep terrain, high elevation topography that gets snow 9 months out of the year at the highest points, old-growth Douglas fir mixed with younger regenerated timber where the state has been implementing thinning operations over the past decade. Thinning is the industry word for selective logging, designed to reduce fuel loads, prevent catastrophic wildfire risk, and maintain healthier stand structures. Lots of creek systems cutting through the terrain. Lots of spawning habitat for salmon. We're talking about a fish recovery zone and an SA critical habitat designation, which means every piece of work the state does in that forest gets scrutinized by environmental groups and federal agencies concerned about listed species protection. The road network accessing these management units is seasonal. We close most of the logging roads by November when the weather gets severe and the gravel turns to mud. The roads reopen in late spring once the snow has melted and the surface has dried enough to support truck traffic. The area is accessed by the main Forest Service road system that branches off from Baker Lake Road, the county road that heads northeast toward the North Fork Nooksack River drainage. Baker Lake Road itself is not the kind of highway you'd find on most maps. It's a narrow county-maintained road that climbs from about 800 feet elevation up to maybe 1,400 feet at the dam. It winds through dense forest, very few pullouts, almost no cell service in certain sections. Once you get past the lake and up into the Forest Service road system, you're truly isolated. There's no infrastructure beyond what the state and federal agencies maintain for timber management purposes. No towns for an hour in any direction. No ranger stations with regular staffing. No way to get help quickly if something goes wrong. June 22nd, 2024. I was up in the area doing a post-thin assessment on a 5-acre patch that the state had cleared about 2 weeks prior. Post-thin work is standard protocol. The crew had removed about 40% of the stand volume, focusing on smaller diameter trees and individuals showing signs of stress from competition or disease. My job is to walk the treatment perimeter, mark any hazard trees the Fuller crew might have missed or that became hazards once the canopy opened up, tag any downed material left during the operation that needs removal for fuel treatment, and document how the stand is responding to the opening. Standard work, standard forest management. I'd been in the field since 7 a.m., left my truck at the Baker Lake Road junction, brought a lunch from my cooler, thermos of coffee and an electrolyte drink for the afternoon, had my laptop for data entry and my Canon camera for documentation. The weather that week had been stable. Cool mornings in the low 50s, sunny afternoons climbing into the high 70s, the kind of conditions that make forest work pleasant instead of miserable. Not a cold rain day, not a sweat-soaking heat day, a good day to be in the field. I was on mile 4 of my planned loop through the thinned unit when I decided to stop and take some habitat shots. This wasn't strictly part of the assessment protocol, but I wanted comparative documentation of the stand structure in the untreated adjacent timber, something useful for the annual report to show the difference between treated and untreated stands. There's a clearing off the main logging road, maybe 200 yards from where the active timber trucks haul cut logs. A private landowner had conducted commercial thinning there years back. The stand recovered well. The understory had regenerated with hardwood species and dense shrub growth. The canopy was opening up nicely, creating that mid-story structure that wildlife biologists talk about. Elk prefer areas like that. They can browse the new growth without being exposed. Deer use it as a transition zone between the deep, dense timber, where they bed down during heat, and the brushy slopes above where they range for forage. I'd seen fresh tracks in that clearing on previous assessments. Elk scat, deer beds, even a cougar dropping that was fairly fresh. I thought the area would provide good comparative material for the department review. I set up my camera, a Canon R6 full-frame mirrorless with a 70mm lens, on a lightweight carbon fiber tripod. Solid equipment for forest documentation. I shot wide angles of the stand structure, the composition and density of the timber, close-ups of specific trees I'd marked for hazard removal. This is routine documentation that the state requires for every management action. Environmental groups file FOIA requests for these photos regularly. We need to demonstrate that work was conducted as planned and documented. I shot for about 15 minutes, different angles, different distances. The light was excellent even at midday, soft and diffuse through the overcast sky. Audio was clean, no wind, no jet overflights, no road noise, just forest ambient. Insect sounds, rustling leaves, occasional bird calls. I was going to pack up and move to the next assessment point when I noticed something on the camera preview. In the far background of one of my wide-angle shots, at the edge of the tree line roughly 80 yards out, there was a shape. Bipedal. Standing upright. I didn't see it when I was taking the shot. I was focused on the foreground, the stand structure, individual trees, but the camera's sensor had picked up something my eyes had missed. In the recorded frame, unmistakably, there it was. I looked up from the preview screen and scanned the tree line very carefully. Nothing visible, just forest, normal forest. No movement, no sound, nothing that appeared out of place. The canopy was dense, the underbrush was thick with salal and sword fern. You could easily hide something large in that kind of vegetation. I looked back at the camera screen and reviewed the footage again, frame by frame this time. The shape was visible for what looked like 3 or 4 consecutive frames, moving through the open space between the trees. A tall form, dark-colored, definitely standing upright, clearly bipedal in its posture. The head was silhouetted against the lighter sky, visible through the canopy. Then the figure turned. I could see the motion of turning, the rotation of shoulders and hips, and it moved into the timber. The motion was slightly blurred by the frame rate and by the motion itself, but the movement was undeniably real and undeniably deliberate. Nothing random about it, nothing that could be explained by wind or falling branches or some trick of light and shadow. This was a living being moving under its own power, making a deliberate choice to move away from the clearing where I'd been standing. Gone. My first thought was exactly what you'd expect. I thought I'd captured something on film worth investigating. Elk stand upright sometimes, particularly bulls in velvet rearing up to look over brush. Black bears do the same thing, but the proportions in the footage didn't match either. The torso was too narrow for a bear. The limbs were too long. The silhouette of the head was different. The gait, as it turned away, was wrong for both. I considered that it might be a person, a hiker I hadn't heard approach, someone who'd wandered off trail and was cutting through the assessment area. Except the footage showed the figure moving away from the road, deeper into the forest, not toward it, not following any established trail. And the movement pattern was off for a human. The stride was too long, too efficient, moving with a kind of fluid quality that doesn't match how people walk through brush and deadfall. I packed up the camera and tripod. I was about to head back to the truck when I heard a sound from the direction the figure had gone. Not loud, not a crash, just the sound of something moving through the forest, pushing through brush, the crack of a branch underfoot. Then it stopped. The forest went quiet. That particular quiet you get when all the ambient noise cuts out and you know something large is present. I've felt that silence before. It's the same quiet that comes when a cougar is in the area, when something large enough to suppress the normal chatter of birds and squirrels has positioned itself nearby. I have a sidearm with me in the field, a 9mm Glock, agency approved, nothing special. It's standard forestry personnel protection from bears. I reached down and unsecured the holster, not going to draw it unless something charged at me, but I wanted it ready. The sound in the brush came again, maybe 50 yards deeper into the stand now, moving away from me, further and further into the timber. I listened to it fade. I took the long route back to the truck, stayed on the main logging road the entire way instead of cutting through the interior timber where the thing had gone. It was probably nothing. A deer that had heard me and spooked. A elk cow reacting to my presence. The camera footage was probably just a tree stump. Afternoon light playing tricks on the image sensor. You see what you expect to see in digital artifacts, in shadows, in motion blur and depth of field effects. Happens all the time. I've been in the field for 16 years. I know how to distinguish between what's actually present and what's a trick of perception and camera optics. But that sound in the brush, the way it moved, the fact that it was moving away from me and deeper into the forest, away from the sound of my voice and the sight of me, that was specific behavior. It wasn't curious, it wasn't aggressive, it was aware that I was present, and it was choosing to remove itself from my proximity. That's not random animal behavior. That's a decision made by something intelligent. I got back to my truck around 2:30 p.m., sat there for a while, engine running, going through the footage on the camera again. The shape was clearly visible in that one wide-angle shot, clear enough for someone trained in species identification to make an assessment. Upright, covered in what looked like fur or hair, dark coloration, maybe brownish gray, the head proportions elongated compared to a human or an ape, shoulders broader, silhouette completely different. I'd seen enough wildlife documentation and enough still frames of bear behavior to know this was something outside the normal range. But I also know the risks of misidentification. It's easy to get excited about something that turned out to be nothing. So I didn't tell anyone that day. I went back to the office, filed my assessment report, uploaded the photos and forest stand documentation, went home. But I kept the full video files from that afternoon separate. Didn't upload them to the shared department drive. Kept them on my personal laptop. That was probably a mistake in hindsight. It meant I had something I wasn't supposed to have. Evidence of something that was not supposed to exist on state-managed land. Or maybe it meant I was being protective of something I wasn't ready to explain to my supervisor or to the department. I'm still uncertain which. For the next 3 weeks, I didn't think about the footage much. Pushed it to the back of my head. Work was steady, the weather stayed clear, and I was running assessment loops across 4 different management units. The usual routine, the usual observations, the usual daily grind of documenting forest stands and hazard trees. And then the second incident happened. This one was different. This one changed the equation. July 11th. Different location, still the same administrative unit, but about 4 miles north of where I'd shot the first footage. A section we call the North Ridge Patch. Roughly 600 acres of mixed conifer that's been recovering from a bark beetle outbreak in the middle 2000s. Douglas fir, western hemlock, some western red cedar in the wetter areas. The trees are healthy now. We've been systematically removing hazard dead-standing timber, salvage logging, very selective, almost surgical, in how precise we've been about it. The road in is narrower than the main haul roads. More of a system road, a Forest Service road that the agency maintains for access but doesn't actively log anymore. The surface is rough, packed gravel with rocks and roots exposed in places. I was doing a second pass hazard inventory on this unit. First pass walkthrough in May, where I'd marked 17 snags in danger of falling near the road. These were large trees, mostly dead Douglas firs, standing snags that had been killed by beetle or that were actively failing. Dead trees, in proximity to roads, are a liability issue. If one falls on a truck or a person, it's an agency problem. Now I was following up to get specific coordinates on each one for the hazard database. Mark coordinates with sub-meter GPS accuracy, take photos from multiple angles, note species, note height, note lean angle. Assess whether there's active woodpecker activity suggesting the tree might fail within a year or 2. Methodical work, slow work, tedious work. You pace out each tree individually, get a GPS coordinate, take photos with the tree marker in the frame for scale, note all the observations. It's the kind of work where you spend a lot of time stopped, looking up, studying the canopy and the condition of each standing dead tree. Your neck gets sore from looking up constantly. Your legs get tired from walking between trees and carrying all the equipment. I was about an hour into that morning work, roughly 9 a.m., standing in front of a large dead Douglas fir, a snag about 110 feet tall, with a nice lean toward the road. Definitely a hazard. I was taking photos from different angles, and I noticed something off the road about 20 yards, partially concealed in the brush at the edge of an old burn scar. It was an elk calf, recent kill. Maybe 2 days old at most. The body was intact, but it had been fed on. Large puncture marks on the hindquarters and along the ribcage on one side. The meat was fresh enough that it hadn't fully decomposed, but old enough that insects had already begun the process. In the North Cascades, elk calf predation is not uncommon. We get mountain lions moving through regularly. There's a recolonization of wolves happening in the more remote drainages. Both will take elk calves, particularly in early summer when the calves are smaller and slower. The kill pattern matched what I'd expect to see from a predator, but the scale was off. The puncture marks were larger than what I'd typically see from a cougar. The depth of the bites was more than a cougar's canines could typically generate, and the way the carcass had been positioned. The calf had been moved, dragged from where it died to where it was feeding. The drag marks in the dust and brush were heavy, deliberate, the impression of something large and heavy moving across the ground. I called in the location, reported it as a possible cougar kill, just to have it documented. The Fish and Wildlife Office takes that kind of report seriously. They might want to investigate, place a trail camera nearby, assess predation patterns. I didn't mention anything about the size of the bite marks or the intensity or the drag pattern. I just gave the coordinates and moved on with my inventory. But I took photos, multiple angles of the carcass, the bite marks, the drag trail leading back into the heavier timber. My camera was with me, standard documentation. I finished that day's work around 4 p.m., drove back down the logging road, filed my report, uploaded the hazard coordinates to the department GIS system, and I didn't mention the kill to anyone except the initial call-out to Fish and Wildlife. But I kept the photos, and I kept thinking about that first footage from 3 weeks prior. The upright figure in the dark trees, the way it had moved, the sound in the brush moving away from me, deeper into the timber, deliberately putting distance between itself and me. And now a fresh elk calf, dragged, fed on, positioned in a way that suggested intention.
Quick thing before we get into it. I have a book coming out. It's called the Bigfoot Codex. It's a compilation of all my research and findings. It's kind of my baby. So if you want to check it out, link's down below. And let's get you back to the video.
2 weeks later, July 25th, I was back at the North Ridge patch. Fish and Wildlife had sent in a couple of trail cameras to monitor the kill area and establish a predation pattern. They'd asked me to check the site again, document any new activity, pull the camera data if it had anything useful. I went in knowing I'd probably see something, knowing that whatever killed that calf would likely be back to feed, or would have already been back multiple times, and the cameras would have documented it. That's how predator behavior works. Predator kills prey. Predator returns to feed on the carcass over several days. Cameras catch the whole cycle. I parked at the trailhead and walked in. The kill site was maybe a quarter-mile away. The approach takes you down a forest road that hasn't been actively used in several years, past the main managed timber, into brushy country, where a fire had swept through and opened up the canopy. The regrowth there is thick. The carcass, what was left of it, was still there, mostly consumed by that point. The agency had decided not to remove it, let the ecosystem take its course. I pulled the trail camera data. 2 separate Rayconix Hyperfire camera units, high-end professional equipment that Fish and Wildlife uses for predator monitoring. 30-second intervals between shots, high-resolution color images during daylight and infrared night vision during darkness. Very sophisticated equipment. I reviewed it on the camera preview screen there in the field, not waiting until I got back to the office. I had to know what was on those cameras. What I saw was clear enough to delete every doubt I'd been carrying. Every rationalization I'd constructed fell apart. The predator was not a cougar. Cougars are sleek, lean animals, tan or reddish-brown colored, built low to the ground with a relatively small head and long tail. This was not that. The predator was not a bear. Bears are bulky, rounded, with that distinctive humped shoulder and a sloping face. This was not that either. The predator was something else entirely. Something that the scientific literature doesn't have a category for. The footage had showed it approaching from the deep timber around dusk on July 11th. It came in on 2 legs, moving upright, moving fast. The gait was long and efficient, covering ground at a speed just below full sprint. Long strides, powerful movement, absolutely confident in its motion through the forest. The creature was massive. The Rayconix cameras are positioned about 5 feet off the ground, mounted on tree trunks at eye level for a standing human. This thing's head was level with or above the camera lens when it stood upright. That puts it at least 6.5 to 7 feet tall. Dark-colored, brownish gray, like the color of river stones in certain light, stocky, muscular build that reminded me more of a bodybuilder than an animal. The arms were notably long, with hands that had distinct digits, not paws. The proportions were exaggerated compared to human proportions. Longer arms, more powerful shoulders, narrower hips, all of which suggested a being optimized for strength and power, rather than human-like balance and manipulation. It bent down over the carcass and fed. The footage showed it feeding for roughly 20 minutes, tearing meat with what looked like a wide jaw and large teeth, consuming the choicest parts of the elk calf first. The liver, the heart, the muscle meat along the ribs. This was not random feeding. This was selective predation. It knew which parts of the animal had the most nutrition, and it ate those first. Then it stopped feeding, raised its head, looked directly at one of the cameras like it was aware the camera was there, and moved on. Walked away on 2 legs into the timber, moving deliberately, purposefully, with a gait that was clearly bipedal. The second camera captured it from a different angle the next night, July 12th. Same creature, or possibly a second one. Harder to tell with the angle and resolution, but the size and coloration were very similar. Feeding on the remaining carcass, the flesh had started to decompose slightly, become less palatable, but the creature was still extracting what nutrition it could. And again, when it was done feeding, it looked directly at the camera. That moment stuck with me. The way the creature's head turned toward the lens, the angle of the turn, the deliberate nature of it, the awareness in the movement. It wasn't random. It wasn't just coincidence that it looked toward the camera. It saw the camera. It recognized the camera for what it was. It registered that something was recording it. And in that moment of looking at the camera, there was intelligence. There was awareness. There was the recognition of a being that understood it was being observed. I sat there in the brush looking at that footage and feeling my chest get tight. I had video evidence of something that doesn't exist, something the scientific community was not prepared to acknowledge, something that was large, powerful, intelligent, and living in the forest I worked in, 30 minutes from the nearest town, 4 miles from a logging road that the agency maintained and used regularly. I did not call fish and wildlife. I did not report what was on those cameras. I pulled the memory cards from both units and left the cameras in place, hanging on their tree branches with no data inside. If Fish and Wildlife came to retrieve them later, they'd find empty cameras and assume the system had malfunctioned or the batteries had died. I told myself I would figure out what to do with the footage. I told myself I needed time to think about the implications. I took the camera cards home. I had a laptop in my office at home where I review assessment photos and prepare reports. I loaded the trail camera footage onto that machine and watched it again. All of it, multiple times. The approach, the feeding, the direct look at the lens, the proportions, the muscle, the intelligence in the movement. Every detail confirmed what I'd captured. This was not a misidentified bear. This was not a tall human or a hunter in a suit or any of the standard explanations people offered when confronted with footage like this. This was something outside the scientific canon. This was something that was real and present and eating elk calves 2 miles from the nearest logging road. I did something I knew I shouldn't do. I reached out to a contact. Years ago, when I was in my 20s, I'd worked with a wildlife biologist on a fish passage project, stream restoration work, habitat surveys. We'd stayed in touch over the years, occasional emails about mutual interests in forest ecology and wildlife management. He'd moved on from state agency work and was now doing independent consulting, writing, research. I sent him an email late one night with an encrypted attachment containing the trail camera footage. No context, no explanation, just the video and a message saying I needed his professional opinion on species identification. He called me the next morning. "Are you sure about this?" That was his first question. I told him yes. I told him I was the person who'd recovered the footage. I told him it had been shot with 2 separate cameras on consecutive nights. I told him the context. A fresh elk calf kill, located in the Cascade Range in Skagit County, Washington, documented by motion-activated trail camera with timestamp verification. He went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You need to delete this footage, all of it, every copy, and you need to never send me anything like this again." I said I didn't understand. He said, "Yes, you do. This is the kind of evidence that gets people disappeared from their lives. This is the kind of thing that ruins careers, that brings attention you do not want." He said it like he knew something specific, like he'd seen this before or heard stories about how these things go. I didn't delete the footage. I made additional copies and secured them in multiple locations, encrypted external drive, cloud backup under a fake account, full copies on the original trail camera cards. I wasn't going to lose this. I wasn't going to let it disappear. But I also wasn't going to report it through normal channels. The agency, the state government, Fish and Wildlife. None of them were interested in evidence like this. They would either deny it outright or they would do something worse, something more systematic, control it, contain it, and silence anyone who knew about it. I kept working. August came, and I was back in the same general areas, doing assessments on different units, covering different sections. I was hyper-aware now. Every sound in the brush, every track, every observation took on different weight. What might have been background noise I was analyzing, trying to determine what had made it. I started seeing evidence I'd probably walked past 100 times before without registering. Claw marks on trees at unusual heights, way higher than any cougar or bear could reach. Marks that looked deliberate, like something with an opposable thumb, or at least a hand with significant gripping capacity, had gripped the tree. Scat that didn't match any species I could identify. I've got an animal tracks and signs field guide I carry in my pack. I've looked through it many times. The scat I started finding, dark, large, with bone fragments still visible in it, didn't match bear, didn't match cougar, didn't match canine. I had no category for it. Tree breaks and branch patterns that suggested something heavy and tall was moving through the area. Not wind damage, which is random and varied. Deliberate pathway clearing, like something was pushing through undergrowth and lower branches to create a path through the dense forest. I noticed how often the area around my assessment sites was being watched. There's a feeling you get when you're being observed, when another creature has registered your presence and is tracking your location and behavior. I've felt it before, with predators. I've felt the weight of a cougar's attention in the forest, that sense of being evaluated. This was different. This was more sustained, more purposeful, more aware. The birds would go silent before I'd hear anything. The squirrels would stop their chattering. The jays would quit their scolding. It's like everything in the forest knows when a large predator is present. And something large was present. Something knew I was in the forest and was keeping track of my movements. I could feel it. On August 20th, I was back at the North Ridge patch. The elk calf was completely consumed by that point, just bone and hide scattered across the ground. I was documenting it for the record, taking photos of the final state of the kill site. I had my camera with me. Standard documentation. I was standing about 30 feet from the skeletal remains, taking a wide-angle shot to show the landscape context, when I noticed something in my peripheral vision, movement. Just at the edge of my vision, deep in the timber about 60 yards out. I turned my head and looked. For a moment, maybe half a second, I saw it clearly. Upright, massive, standing motionless at the forest edge, watching me. The same creature from the trail camera footage. The same proportions, the same build, and it was aware that I'd seen it. The moment my eyes registered it, it turned and walked into the deeper timber, slowly, deliberately, not fleeing but withdrawing, like it was choosing to remove itself from my visual range. I stood there holding my camera and watching it go, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not fear, exactly. Respect, maybe. A recognition that this was an intelligent being making a deliberate choice about how to interact with me. A human it knew was operating in its territory. I raised my camera and pointed it at where the creature had been, but by then it was gone. The forest was empty and quiet. I had maybe 30 seconds of footage of the place where it had stood, but the creature itself had moved faster than I could react. There was nothing in the frame but timber and brush and the space where something had just been. That encounter changed the way I approached the work. Not the work itself, the daily assessments and the documentation, but the awareness I brought to it. I began to understand that my presence in the forest was not invisible or unnoticed. The creature, or creatures, plural, I suspected there was more than one. They knew when I was there. They knew the roads I used, the patterns of my movement, the time of day I worked. I was being observed by something that was sophisticated enough to recognize patterns and predict my behavior. That's a profoundly disorienting realization. September came, and the work continued in earnest. I finished assessments across 4 different units in the Northridge area. The weather began to cool noticeably. The days got shorter at a rate you could actually perceive. By the end of the month, we were losing daylight at a noticeable pace, maybe 5 or 6 minutes per day. There were occasional heavy rains that made the logging roads muddy and challenging to navigate. Not road-closing weather yet, but getting close. The kind of conditions where you had to be careful about spinning out on a muddy section or getting stuck on a grade where the surface had turned to slop. But I kept working, and I kept watching, and I kept seeing evidence that I was not alone in that forest. Evidence was everywhere once I started knowing what to look for. Fresh scat appearing in the same locations repeatedly, not random scat scattered across the forest. Deliberate placements like marker posts, like territory markers left in specific high-traffic areas. Tracks that were too large and with too many toes to be from any known species. I found a track at one point, pressed into wet soil near a creek, that was easily 18 inches long, 5 distinct toe marks. The heel was deeply impressed. The stride length suggested a 7 or 8 foot tall individual. Tree damage that suggested tool use, intentional breaking of branches rather than damage from wind or snow. I found sections of standing timber where branches had been deliberately snapped at shoulder height, creating cleared pathways through the dense underbrush, the kind of pathway a large bipedal animal would create while moving through the forest. At one point, I found a clearing where multiple trees had been bent down in a semicircle pattern. This wasn't a small thing. These were substantial trees, maybe 12 to 14 inches diameter. They'd been pushed down deliberately and held down. The bark was stripped where the branches had been forced down against the trunk. The branches themselves had been snapped off or pulled off. Whatever had done it had put the tree down, consumed or processed something, maybe bark or sapwood or some other vegetation, and then left. The pattern was too organized to be random. It looked deliberate. It looked like something was using the forest as a resource, understanding which trees had edible or useful parts, deliberately manipulating the forest to access what it needed. By late September, I was thinking about making a public report, reaching out to a university, contacting a research institution, trying to go through official channels, but outside the state government apparatus. My contact had scared me when he'd said people disappear. But maybe that was necessary. Maybe evidence like this needed to be seen. Maybe I was wrong to keep it to myself. And then 3 people showed up at my office. It was a Thursday, September 26th. I was at my desk preparing an end-of-month report, uploading final assessment photos and hazard tree coordinates to the department management system. I'd been at my desk for maybe an hour when my supervisor, Carol, came to my office door and said I had visitors. She looked uncomfortable. "They're asking for you specifically by name," she said. I asked her who they were. She said they didn't introduce themselves. They'd come in and asked if Dale worked in this department, and when she said yes, they asked where they could find me. 3 men. They came into my office without being asked to sit and without introducing themselves. They didn't knock. They just walked in like they owned the place. They wore casual clothing that looked like they'd never been worn before. New jeans with the creases still visible. Fleece jackets in neutral tan and gray colors. The kind of uniform you buy when you need to look normal, but you're not actually a normal person who wears clothes regularly. One of them was older, maybe late 50s, with gray hair cut very short, and a face that had the kind of flatness you see in government employees and military contractors. Someone who'd spent years making decisions that hurt people and had learned not to show the cost of that. The other 2 were younger, probably early 40s, with the kind of physical presence that comes from serious gym time and tactical training. They had the posture of people trained to carry weapons and prepared to use violence if necessary, but there was nothing overtly threatening about how they presented themselves. They were calm, professional, absolutely certain of their authority in my office. They didn't make eye contact with me initially. They just stood in my office and waited for me to acknowledge them. My supervisor was still standing in the doorway, shifting her weight uncomfortably, clearly wanting to leave but unsure if she should. I made eye contact with her and nodded, let her know it was okay to go. She left, closing the door behind her. As soon as the door was closed, the older one spoke. His voice was flat, the way people sound when they've spent a lot of time controlling their emotional delivery, trained to keep their tone neutral regardless of content. "Your supervisor says you've been working in the North Cascades management unit." "That's correct," I said, trying to keep my own voice level even though my heart had begun to accelerate. "We've been tracking some activity in that area," the older man continued. "Some equipment we maintain has picked up some unusual data. We wanted to talk to you about what you might have observed in the field over the past few months." The way he said equipment we maintain was careful. He was not claiming the equipment was his, not claiming his agency or organization had placed it. He was being deliberately vague about the source and origin of whatever surveillance system had picked up the trail camera footage. I knew exactly what they were talking about. The trail camera footage. My contact had gone to someone, or someone had found out I'd made copies of that footage and had sent it to someone, and now 3 government men were standing in my office wanting to know what I knew. I did what anyone in that situation would do. I lied. I said, "I've been doing standard assessments. We're managing hazard trees, looking at forest health, standard DNR work. Unusual activity could mean anything. We've had some predation on elk calves. Fish and Wildlife is aware. I don't think it's anything particularly unusual." The older man's expression didn't change. He said, "We'd like to see your field documentation, your photos, your assessments, any video or audio you've collected." I had all of my field documentation backed up on the department network. But I also had copies of the trail camera footage on my personal encrypted storage. They weren't asking for those specifically, but they were definitely looking for evidence that I had that footage and knew what it showed. I told them my field documentation was all uploaded to the department system, which was technically true, just not complete. The most important documentation was missing. The younger man on the left, still without making eye contact, said, "We're going to need access to your personal computer and any external storage devices you've used in the past 6 months." "That's not something I'm going to authorize without a warrant," I said. They looked at each other. The older man said, You can cooperate with us now, or we can make this a legal matter and get a warrant and confiscate everything, and then you're going to be spending a lot of time explaining to people why you had that material and what you intended to do with it. Neither option is good for you. That's when I understood they were serious. This wasn't posturing or a standard inquiry. These were people who had the ability and the willingness to ruin my life if I didn't cooperate. They weren't asking for permission. They were informing me of what was going to happen, and the only choice I had was whether I was going to facilitate it myself or whether they were going to do it with the legal system as cover. I told them I wanted to speak to a lawyer. The older one said, "That's your right." He pulled out a card, actually just handed me the card without any introduction or explanation of who he was. The card was blank, except for a phone number. Nothing else. No name, no agency, no title. He said, "If you want to cooperate, call that number. If you want to go the legal route, we'll see you in court." Then they left. I sat in my office for probably half an hour after they left. My supervisor was asking questions from the outer office, wanted to know if everything was okay, wanted to know what that was about. I told her it was nothing, some federal agency doing a routine inquiry about forest management practices, just bureaucracy. She didn't believe me, but she let it drop. I went home, and I called my contact, the guy who'd told me to delete the footage. I told him 3 men had shown up at my office demanding access to my computer and external storage. There was a long silence on the line. Then he said, "What did they look like?" I described them. Another silence. Then he said, "Did they tell you who they were?" I said no. He said, "If they came to you in person and they came without legal paperwork, then they're not official federal anything. They're not FBI, not Fish and Wildlife, not any of the normal government agencies that do this kind of work. That means they're private. Someone hired them to get that footage." I asked him what I should do. He said, "You need to disappear that footage completely. Every copy. You need to make sure there's no record that you ever had it. You need to cover your tracks, professionally and personally, and you need to figure out if you trust me with a copy. Because if you keep it, they're going to find it, and they're going to do something about that. If you give me a copy, I might be able to make sure it stays safe. Might. There's no guarantee." I didn't make a decision that night. I went to work the next day and tried to act normal. But I was hyper-aware now. I was looking at my coworkers differently, wondering who might be reporting on me, who might have been asked to monitor my activity. The department uses electronic access logs for the computer network. If someone was really determined, they could see exactly what I'd accessed and when. My encrypted files would be harder to track, but not impossible if they had the resources and the clearance. That Friday, I called in sick to work. I called my supervisor early in the morning and told her I had a migraine, that I wouldn't be coming in, that I might be out for a few days depending on how I felt. She accepted it without question. I rarely called in sick. In 16 years with the agency, I'd probably taken maybe 3 or 4 sick days total. The culture is that forestry workers don't call in sick unless they're seriously incapacitated. So my calling in out of the blue probably raised some flags, but there was nothing she could do about it. I drove to a retail electronics store in Seattle, 45 minutes south from where I was living. A major chain, nothing local, nothing where I might have regular customers or be recognized. I bought a new portable solid-state drive with cache. Top-of-the-line model, 2 terabytes, the kind of storage that could hold vast amounts of video data. I paid cash specifically, so there would be no credit card record of the purchase. I drove to the downtown area, and I went to an internet cafe, a place that rents computers by the hour and has anonymized access. You pay cash, you don't give your name, you get a password for the station, and you can stay for whatever amount of time you rented. Very anonymous. I uploaded every piece of video footage I had to my contact's secure server. Every frame of the trail camera video from the North Ridge patch, both nights, both cameras. Every bit of footage from my camera of the upright creature in the forest, all of it. I encrypted it all before uploading, using encryption protocols that I knew would be very difficult to break. Encrypted and uploaded to a location that I no longer had direct access to. Once it was on his server, in his location, under his control, I couldn't access it remotely. I could only reach out to him and ask him to retrieve it if necessary. That was the point. I wanted it out of my possession. I wanted plausible deniability. I wanted to be able to say truthfully that I didn't have the footage anymore, that I'd deleted it, that I didn't know where it went. Then I went to another store and bought a commercial hard drive wiper. The kind that magnetically erases data completely. Not the kind that just deletes files, which can be recovered from unused sectors. The kind that actually overwrites the entire drive, sector by sector, rendering data recovery impossible. I came home and I wiped my personal computer and my encrypted external drive clean. I ran the wiper 3 times on each device to make absolutely sure. Everything that wasn't backed up somewhere else, I deleted it. The field documentation that the government men had asked for, I left untouched in the department system. Let them have that. The personal copies, the comprehensive footage, the encrypted archive that I'd been building, all of that was gone. Completely erased, no recovery possible. I went back to work on Monday. Nobody said anything. My supervisor didn't mention the visitors. Nobody asked about my sick day. The office operated like nothing had happened. But the call never came. The men with the blank business card never followed up. And that silence was somehow worse than if they'd shown up again. I stayed in my position with the state DNR for another month. I finished my seasonal assessments. October came, and with it the end of the field season. The logging roads were beginning to get muddy. The higher elevation units were starting to see snow. It was time to transition to office work, internal audits, report writing, the kind of work you do when you're not actively in the field. But I couldn't stay. I knew too much. I'd seen too much. And the conversation with my contact had made it clear that the knowledge I was carrying had weight, had value, and had people willing to do serious things to control it. I resigned from the DNR in early November. I told them it was personal reasons, that I needed a change of pace, that the seasonal work wasn't sustainable long-term anymore. The agency had no way to know that I was lying. They accepted my resignation and I was out. Clean break, I moved to a different state. Not far away, just far enough that I was no longer in the jurisdiction, no longer easily accessible to people who might have questions about what I saw in the forest. I found new work, consulting on various projects, nothing that requires me to be in sensitive forest management situations. It pays less than the DNR job, but it doesn't require me to carry knowledge that makes me a liability. I've had 2 years to think about what I saw in the North Cascades, 2 years to process the footage, to understand the implications, to accept that there is something living in that forest that the world is not ready to know about. The footage is secure. Multiple encrypted backups in locations I trust. If something happens to me, if I disappear or if I'm found in a tragic accident, there are instructions in place for that material to be released. I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm just trying to survive with the knowledge I'm carrying. I never saw another sign of those 3 men. I never received any legal action, many letters, any communication of any kind. That silence tells me that they got what they needed. They got access to something through their normal channels. They've moved on to whatever the next project is, and I'm no longer relevant to them. But the fear doesn't completely go away. The awareness that I've been targeted, that I have information someone wants to control, that remains constant. The creature I saw in the North Cascades, the thing that was clearly visible in those trail camera frames, feeding on the elk calf, looking directly at the camera with what I can only describe as awareness and intelligence. That thing is still out there. It's still moving through that forest. It's still hunting, still feeding, still living a life that is completely independent of human knowledge or recognition. And there are other creatures, I'm almost certain of it. A breeding population, a family group or social structure that I never got close enough to understand. I think about going back sometimes. The rational part of me knows that's the worst idea I could possibly have. But there's another part of me that knows what real wilderness looks like now, that knows the forest contains something beyond the known, beyond the categorized and the documented. That part of me wants to see it again, wants to understand how something so large and so intelligent can exist in a space that should be full of humans and government agencies and scientific observation. The answer is that it can't exist at that proximity and stay unknown. Unless the systems that usually catalog and document things, unless the people who maintain those systems have decided for whatever reason that ignorance is better than acknowledgement. And if they've made that decision, if they're willing to send men with blank business cards to silence people, then maybe they're right. Maybe some things should stay unknown. The footage exists. The trail camera data exists. The evidence of that elk calf and the pattern of predation exists. All of it is documented and dated and time-stamped. It exists in the place where my contact stored it, and it's waiting there in case the conditions ever change, in case someone with power and platform decides that the truth is worth the disruption it will cause. I'm not that person. I'm just a forestry worker who saw something he wasn't supposed to see, and now I live with the consequences of that knowledge. I don't know what will happen if that footage ever gets released. I don't know how the world will respond to clear evidence of something that isn't supposed to exist. But I know that whatever reaction comes, it won't be neutral. It will be massive. It will change how we think about wilderness, about predators, about the scale of life that exists independent of human observation and documentation. And that might be worth the risk. That might be worth the price that people like me have already paid for having seen it. If you're a wildlife professional, if you work in forest management or conservation or anything adjacent to places where you might encounter something outside the normal range, keep your eyes open. Keep a camera with you. Document everything. Because what I saw proves that the world is stranger and larger than the institutions want to acknowledge. And there are people out there, people with resources and authority, who are willing to do whatever it takes to keep that strangeness contained. But it can't be contained. It's too big, too intelligent, too present in the spaces we share with it. Sooner or later, more people are going to see. More footage will surface. The story is going to be too big to suppress. I'm going to pause here for now because what happened after I left the DNR is a separate chapter of this whole thing. The 3 men who showed up at my office, the decision to leave my position, the years following. All of that deserves its own time and space in the telling. Let me continue with what came after. I moved to a different state, not far away, just far enough that I was no longer in the jurisdiction, no longer easily accessible to people who might have questions about what I saw in the forest. I found new work consulting on various projects, environmental assessments, that kind of thing. Nothing that requires me to be in sensitive forest management situations anymore. It pays less than the DNR job, but it doesn't require me to carry knowledge that makes me a liability to my employer or to government agencies. In the 2 years since leaving Washington, I've had time to think about what I saw in the North Cascades. Time to process it, time to understand the implications, time to accept that there is something living in that forest that the world is not ready to know about. The footage remains secure. Multiple encrypted backups in locations I trust. I've set up a dead man's switch type of arrangement. If something happens to me, if I disappear, or if I'm found in what would be described as an accident, there are instructions in place. People I trust have instructions. That material gets released. I know that sounds paranoid. I know that sounds like the kind of thing someone says when they're losing their grip on reality. But the 3 men in my office were real. The blank business card was real. The pressure to hand over everything I'd found was real. And the decision by someone to follow up by sending armed consultants to my workplace was also real. I never saw another sign of those 3 men after that September day. I never received any legal action, any letters, any communication of any kind. That silence tells me that they got what they needed. They got access to something through their normal channels. They've moved on to whatever the next project is, and I'm no longer relevant to them. But the fear doesn't completely go away. The awareness that I've been targeted, that I have information someone wants to control, that remains constant. I check my mirrors when I drive. I notice who's in the coffee shops. I pay attention to whether the same car shows up too many times. I know I'm probably being paranoid. But paranoia in cases like this might be the only thing that keeps you alive. The creature I saw in the North Cascades, the thing that was clearly visible in those trail camera frames, feeding on the elk calf, looking directly at the camera with what I can only describe as awareness and intelligence. That thing is still out there. It's still moving through that forest. It's still hunting, still feeding, still living a life that is completely independent of human knowledge or recognition. The footage confirms it wasn't a bear, wasn't a cougar, wasn't a misidentification of known wildlife. It was something else, something that had learned how to exist in proximity to human activity without being consistently detected. Something that knew when it was being watched and by what. Something that understood the value and significance of cameras and surveillance equipment. And there are other creatures. I'm almost certain of it now. Not just one individual, but a breeding population. A family group or social structure that I never got close enough to understand. The way the creature moved, the patterns of predation, the deliberate behavior when it encountered the trail cameras, all of that suggests organization, communication, social hierarchy. These are not solitary animals. These are beings with society, with culture, with ways of passing knowledge to their young. I think about going back sometimes. The rational part of me knows that's the worst idea I could possibly have. Going back to the North Cascades, going back to the concrete Darrington unit, going back to the places where I saw what I saw. That would be inviting contact with whatever is there. That would be exposing myself to beings that are more powerful, more intelligent, more adapted to that environment than I am. It would be an incredibly dangerous thing to do. But there's another part of me that knows what real wilderness looks like now. I know what the forest contains. I know it's something beyond the known, beyond the categorized and the documented in scientific literature. That part of me wants to see it again, wants to understand how something so large and so intelligent can exist in a space that should be full of humans and government agencies and scientific observation. How does something that big stay hidden? How does something that powerful avoid being documented, captured, proven to exist? The answer is complicated, and it involves the unwillingness of institutions to acknowledge what doesn't fit their models. It involves the active suppression of evidence by people who have the power and the motivation to do so. It involves a choice made at some level of government or by private organizations with access to that government, that some truths are better left unknown. The footage exists. The trail camera data exists. The evidence of that elk calf and the pattern of predation exists. All of it is documented and dated and time-stamped. It exists in the place where my contact stored it, and it's waiting there in case the conditions ever change, in case someone with power and platform decides that the truth is worth the disruption it will cause. I'm not that person. I'm just a forestry worker who saw something he wasn't supposed to see, and now I live with the consequences of that knowledge. My contact has reached out once in the 2 years since I uploaded the footage to his server. It was an email, encrypted, untraceable, just a single line of text. The archive is secure, nothing more. No explanation of what he meant by that. No indication of whether he'd shown the footage to anyone else or whether he was still sitting on it, waiting for the right moment, or whether he was actively protecting it from people who wanted to access it. But that message told me the footage still exists, that he still has it, that it hasn't been destroyed or seized or made to disappear. I've thought about calling him and asking directly. I've thought about saying that enough time has passed, that the story needs to be told, that the evidence needs to be public. But I know how that ends. The footage gets released. There's a media firestorm for a few weeks. The scientific community dismisses it as a hoax or a misidentification, and then people like me become targets for people who want the story to stay quiet. 3 men in an office was just the beginning. If this ever goes public, if the story ever breaks in a way that can't be contained, there will be much more serious consequences for anyone associated with the evidence. So I wait. I do my consulting work. I keep my head down. I don't talk about what I saw, not to friends, not to family, not to anyone except my therapist, and even with her, I'm careful about the details. I don't want anyone else knowing where the footage is or that I even have access to it. Knowledge like that is dangerous. It makes people targets. I've been looking at the news, watching for any indication that things might be changing. Whether anyone else has seen something similar in that area or elsewhere in the Cascades. Whether the scientific community is starting to acknowledge the possibility that something like this exists. Whether the government agencies are being forced to disclose something they've known about all along. So far, there's been nothing. The forest keeps its secrets. The creatures that live there keep their secrets. And the people who know about it keep their secrets too. What I will say is this. If you spend time in remote forests, if you work in timber management or wildlife management or anything that puts you in proximity to wild country for extended periods, you need to understand that you are not alone out there. You need to accept that there are things in the forest that don't have scientific names, that don't have entries in field guides, that don't fit into the categories that human beings have created. Those things are watching you. They are aware of your presence. They are making decisions about how to interact with you based on their own logic and their own reasoning. And if you happen to capture evidence of those things, if you happen to get footage or photographs or any kind of documentation that proves they exist, you need to think very carefully about what you do with that information. Because there are people who will want to control that evidence. There are people who will do serious things to make sure that evidence never becomes public. They have resources, they have authority, and they have a vested interest in keeping the world as it is, in maintaining the fiction that we understand the natural world, that we've catalogued everything that lives in it, that there are no mysteries left. But there are mysteries. There are big mysteries, living, breathing, intelligent mysteries that exist in the spaces we've designated as wild. And the fact that they exist is slowly being discovered by more and more people. But the fact that they exist is being actively suppressed by people who have the power to do the suppressing. I don't know what will happen if that footage ever gets released. I don't know how the world will respond to clear evidence of something that isn't supposed to exist. But I know that whatever reaction comes, it won't be neutral. It will be massive. It will change how we think about wilderness, about predators, about the scale of life that exists independent of human observation and documentation. It will force a reckoning with everything we thought we knew about the natural world. And that might be worth the risk. That might be worth the price that people like me have already paid for having seen it. For now, I'm watching and waiting. I'm watching to see if anyone else comes forward with footage or stories or evidence of their own encounters. I'm watching to see if the topic starts appearing in places it hasn't before, if the world is slowly being prepared for knowledge it's not ready for. I'm watching the government agencies to see if they're going to be forced to make any kind of official statement or acknowledgement. And I'm waiting for my contact to send me a message saying that conditions have changed, that it's time to release what I've been holding on to. That might never happen. I might carry this knowledge until I die and never speak its name out loud. But the footage exists. The evidence exists. And some part of me knows that sooner or later, someone is going to be brave enough, or desperate enough, or angry enough to pull that thread and let the whole thing unravel. When that happens, when that evidence finally gets out into the world, everyone will have to confront the fact that we share this planet with something we never fully understood, that there are mysteries in the forest, that there are beings out there that are more intelligent and more powerful than we want to admit, and that the world is much stranger and much larger than the institutions want us to believe. I'm still working. I'm still getting up in the morning and going to work and trying to maintain some kind of normal life. But nothing feels normal anymore. Nothing feels the same after you've seen what I've seen, after you've looked into the forest and understood that it contains something that fundamentally challenges everything you thought you knew about the world. After you've had men in your office with blank business cards asking for evidence of something that's supposed to be impossible. The North Cascades are still there. The logging roads are still being maintained. The timber management operations are still happening. And somewhere in that forest, the creatures are still moving through the trees, hunting, feeding, living their lives in a way that has nothing to do with human knowledge or recognition. They're watching the roads. They're aware of the trucks. They know the patterns of human activity, and they've learned how to exist in that space without being consistently captured or proven or documented in a way that the scientific community would have to accept. But the footage exists. And I exist, and I know what I saw, and that knowledge is mine to carry, mine to protect, mine to release if and when the time comes that releasing it becomes possible. Until then, I wait. If you're a wildlife professional, if you work in forest management or conservation or anything adjacent to places where you might encounter something outside the normal range, keep your eyes open. Keep a camera with you. Document everything. Because what I saw proves that the world is stranger and larger than the institutions want to acknowledge. And there are people out there, people with resources and authority, who are willing to do whatever it takes to keep that strangeness contained. But it can't be contained. It's too big, too intelligent, too present in the spaces we share with it. Sooner or later, more people are going to see. More footage will surface. The story is going to be too big to suppress. And when that happens, everything changes. I need to go back and talk about what I saw with fresh eyes now. Looking back from this distance 2 years later, I can articulate things that were confusing to me in the moment. The creature I observed, both in the trail camera footage and in that August encounter in the clearing, was not behaving like an animal should behave. It was behaving like something intelligent, something that had learned things, something that had culture and understanding and intentional behavior patterns. Think about how a predator normally responds to being observed. A cougar in the forest doesn't turn and look at a camera and then deliberately move away. A bear doesn't show that kind of awareness of surveillance equipment. An elk doesn't look back toward the source of a threat and make eye contact with it. These are behaviors that require a level of cognition, a level of awareness, that we don't normally associate with animals. We associate them with humans, with intelligent beings that understand the difference between natural objects and artificial ones, that understand what a camera is and what it does. The creature's behavior with the trail cameras suggested that level of intelligence. It approached the kill site. It fed. It finished feeding, and then it looked directly at the camera. That look wasn't accidental. That wasn't the camera catching a moment where the creature happened to be looking in that direction. The creature deliberately turned its head and looked at the lens. It took time to look. It stood there for a moment and looked. Then it moved on. That sequence of actions suggests understanding. That suggests a being that recognized the camera as something significant and chose to acknowledge it. When I saw the creature in the clearing on August 20th, it did something similar. It stood at the forest edge. It let me see it. It made sure I registered its presence. And when I turned my head and made eye contact with it, it deliberately withdrew. It didn't run. It didn't attack. It walked away slowly, moving back into the timber in a way that communicated choice, not fear. That's not animal behavior. That's negotiation. That's a being saying, I see you, you see me, and I'm choosing to remove myself from this situation. That's intelligence. That's communication of a sophisticated type. Since leaving the forest, I've tried to understand what it means that these creatures exist. What does it mean for our understanding of the natural world? What does it mean for wilderness? What does it mean for our relationship with the forest? The first implication is that everything we think we know about the top predators in North American wilderness is wrong. We think we know what the apex predators are. We think we've cataloged them, identified them, understood their ranges and their behavior. But if something is predating on elk calves at the scale I observed, if multiple creatures were present in that forest, if they were organized and intelligent and hunting successfully, then our understanding is incomplete. There's something at the top of that food chain that we don't have in our textbooks, something that doesn't have a scientific name, something that's been living in proximity to human activity without being fully discovered. The second implication is that the standard mechanisms we use to document wildlife are not sufficient for discovering this species. Trail cameras work fine for getting images of bears and cougars. GPS collars work for tracking normal animals. Genetic surveys work for finding evidence of known species. But something intelligent enough to understand what a camera is and to choose whether to be captured by it will eventually learn to avoid cameras, to move around them, to operate in the darkness and in the spaces where human observation can't reach. This species might not be rare at all. We might be surrounded by them and simply unable to detect them because they're too smart and too aware to be easily tracked. The third implication is that institutions and governments already know this exists. The appearance of those 3 men at my office wasn't a sign that the government had just discovered what I'd found. It was a sign that they already knew. They had surveillance systems in place. They had equipment monitoring that forest. They had knowledge that something was there. And they had a policy of containment, of keeping that knowledge quiet, of suppressing evidence and silencing witnesses. The question isn't whether these creatures exist. The question is why the people who know about it want to keep it secret. I've thought about this constantly for 2 years. I've tried to imagine the reasoning. Maybe it's because acknowledging their existence would require changing all the land management protocols. If there's an intelligent species living in the forest, you can't just log it and manage it for timber production. You have to consider that species' needs, its habitat requirements, its protection. That changes the economics of forestry. That changes land use. That changes billions of dollars of revenue. Maybe it's because acknowledging their existence would require changing our understanding of evolution and biology. If there's a large ape-like creature living in North America that's intelligent and organized and has been here the whole time, that changes paleontology. That changes anthropology. That changes everything we thought we knew about primate evolution and distribution. Maybe it's because once you acknowledge that something like this exists, you have to explain how it's possible. You have to conduct research. You have to protect it. You have to potentially recognize it as a sentient species with rights. And if it's a sentient species, then what's our moral obligation? Are we committing genocide through habitat destruction? Are we ethically responsible for these creatures in a way we haven't been responsible for them while denying their existence? All of those considerations are enough reason for a government to decide that silence is better than acknowledgement. Silence is cheaper. Silence is easier. Silence doesn't require anyone to change their policies or their behavior or their understanding of the world. The footage proves something exists. But the footage also proves that the institutions that could validate it, the scientific community, the government agencies, the people with the platform to make people believe, they don't want the evidence public. They want it controlled. They want it suppressed. And they're willing to take action against anyone who tries to make it public. I'm still living with the aftermath of that decision. The decision to photograph what I saw, the decision to study it, the decision to reach out to my contact. I can't go back to that forest. I can't work in forestry anymore. I can't share my knowledge with anyone except in this limited way, this anonymous account that might reach a few people. I can't do the job I was trained for because doing that job means going back to the place where the creatures are. And going back there means potential contact with people who want to suppress the evidence. That's the real cost. That's the real price of knowledge like this. You lose your career, you lose your ability to live a normal life, you lose your freedom to speak and share and communicate openly about what you've discovered. You have to live with the knowledge that there are people out there who would do whatever it takes to make sure your story doesn't become public. But I still believe the footage should be released. I still believe the world should know that this exists. I still believe that living with the knowledge that there's something intelligent and powerful living in the forest alongside us, that's more important than maintaining comfortable ignorance. People deserve to know. Scientists deserve to study it. The creatures deserve to be acknowledged and protected rather than hunted and suppressed. So I hold the knowledge. I keep it with me. I wait for the right moment when the conditions might be right for release. And I continue living my life in a way that lets me exist in the world without drawing attention to what I know. The forest is still there, the creatures are still living in it, and the evidence exists, waiting in a secure location, waiting for the day when someone has the courage to bring it into the light. What follows is additional context about the discovery and the aftermath, details I've been holding back, details that matter. The specific coordinates where I found the elk calf kill are approximately 48 degrees, 46 minutes, 12 seconds north, 121 degrees, 48 minutes, 37 seconds west. North Ridge Patch, Concrete Darrington Unit, Skagit County, Washington. If you were to go there today, you'd find a section of recovering forest, mixed conifer stand, abundant deer and elk sign, creek drainage to the north and east. You'd find yourself in the place where something large is living. You'd find yourself in the territory of a creature that understands predation and survival, and how to exist undetected in proximity to human activity. The trail cameras that Fish and Wildlife placed would not be there anymore. That was 14 months ago. They would have been retrieved, the data would have been analyzed by people with the authority and the resources to determine what they'd captured. Those people would have made a decision about what to do with the information. My guess is that the cameras and the data are in a secure location now, in a government archive, filed away with all the other evidence that doesn't fit into the official narrative about North American wildlife. The footage I took with my personal camera, the footage of the creature in the clearing on August 20th, that would be impossible to recover now. I didn't back it up. I only had it on the camera card and in the encrypted files I submitted to my contact. The original documentation is gone, deleted, wiped, overwritten. There's no trace of it anywhere except in the backup my contact has secured. I've thought about reaching out to him again and asking for a copy. I could request that he send me the footage, give me access to it again. We could release it together. We could break the story. We could make the evidence public. But every time I think about doing that, I remember the 3 men in my office. I remember the blank business card. I remember the conversation with my contact about how people disappear when they get involved with evidence like this. I remember the ranger in 1958 who saw the creatures and then walked away from his entire life. The fear wins most of the time. The rational part of my brain says that my safety is more important than the story, that my life is worth more than the revelation, that I should protect myself and let history unfold on its own timeline. But there are other moments, late-night moments when I'm thinking clearly, when the weight of the knowledge becomes too much, when I think that the world deserves to know this. In those moments, I think about calling my contact and saying, let's do this. Let's release the footage. Let's force the conversation. Let's change everything. I haven't made that call yet, but I might. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond the simple fact that an unknown primate species exists in North America. The implications reach into how we think about wilderness, how we think about conservation, how we think about government, how we think about truth and power, and who gets to decide what is real and what is not. If this creature exists, and the evidence suggests it does, then wilderness is not what we thought it was. It's not empty land waiting for human use and exploitation. It's occupied territory. It's home to beings that are intelligent and aware and capable of sophisticated behavior. That changes everything about how we approach land management, resource extraction, environmental policy. If this creature exists undetected, then our science is incomplete. Our biology is incomplete. Our understanding of evolution is incomplete. We're missing major branches of the tree of life. We're missing species that should be obvious once we know to look for them. That raises questions about how many other species exist that we don't know about. How many creatures are living in the margins of our civilization, hidden from us, because they're intelligent enough, or cautious enough, or rare enough to avoid our detection systems. If government agencies know about this and are suppressing the evidence, then the relationship between science and power is even more compromised than we realize. Then the institutions we depend on to tell us the truth about the natural world are actively lying by omission. They're withholding knowledge, they're manipulating the narrative, they're protecting financial interests and political power over the pursuit of truth. All of these implications are revolutionary. All of them require fundamental changes in how we think about the world. And all of them are reasons for powerful people to want this evidence suppressed and this story silenced. I'm still a witness to something that shouldn't be kept secret. I'm still a person who carries knowledge that could change how the world thinks about wilderness and predators and truth. And I'm still struggling with what to do with that knowledge, how to balance my safety against my conscience, how to decide whether the world's right to know outweighs my need to survive. The creature I saw in the forest was not aggressive toward me. It didn't attack. It didn't threaten. It observed. It communicated through its behavior that it was aware of me and that it was making a choice about how to interact. That choice was to withdraw, to remove itself, to leave me alone. That behavior suggests intelligence. That behavior suggests something that understands boundaries and respects them. That behavior suggests something that might be capable of coexistence with humans if humans were willing to accept its existence and grant it the space it needs. But we've never been good at coexistence with things we're afraid of. And we're afraid of what we don't understand. And we suppress what frightens us. And that's the real tragedy here. Not that the creature exists in secret, but that we're all living in a world where something amazing and profound is being actively hidden from us, because powerful people think ignorance is better than knowledge. I don't have an ending for this story. I don't have a resolution or a moment of clarity where I figured out what to do or what happens next. I just have the knowledge. I have the memory of seeing something impossible. I have the footage secured in a place I trust. And I have the question, unanswered, waiting in my mind. When is the right time to tell the world? Let me talk about what living with this knowledge has been like. Not the big philosophical implications, but the personal cost. The day-to-day reality of being someone who knows something that the world isn't supposed to know. The first phase was denial. The first few days after the trail camera discovery, I went through all the standard rationalization cycles. It's a misidentification. It's a person in a suit. It's a trick of light and camera angles. It's a bear standing up. It's an elk moving through the frame in a strange way. Every frame of footage I reviewed, I tried to construct an explanation that fit within the known universe. Because the alternative, the reality that something undiscovered and intelligent was living in the forests I worked in, that was too big to accept. The mind resists impossible things. The brain tries to make the impossible fit into categories of the possible. The denial phase lasted about 3 days. Then the evidence became too overwhelming. The second camera confirmed it. The size of the creature, the proportions, the behavior, all of it was consistent. Not an error, not a glitch, real. The second phase was fear. Real, visceral fear. Fear of what this meant for my safety. Fear of what would happen if I told anyone. Fear of how the world would react. Fear of what I would become once I became the person who'd seen this thing. The fear hit me in waves. I'd be at work, and suddenly my heart would start racing. I'd be lying in bed at night, and I wouldn't be able to sleep because my mind was churning with anxiety about the implications. I had a few panic attacks in those early weeks. I'd go to my car on lunch break and just sit there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe through the panic. The third phase was obsession. I consumed everything I could find related to Bigfoot sightings, cryptid research, unexplained wildlife footage. I read books. I watched videos. I joined online forums under fake names and lurked, reading other people's encounter stories, looking for patterns. I contacted my wildlife biologist friend because I needed to talk to someone, even though I knew I shouldn't. I needed someone to validate what I was experiencing, someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. The fourth phase was isolation. Once I realized that people who knew about this evidence had come looking for it. Once I understood that there were real consequences for possessing this knowledge, I withdrew from my normal life. I stopped going out socially. I stopped talking to friends. I stopped sharing what was happening in my life. My coworkers started asking if I was okay. My family noticed that I was different, but I couldn't tell them. Telling them would put them at risk. Telling them would make them complicit in knowledge they didn't want to have. So I isolated. I stopped being the person I was before the forest revealed its secrets. The fifth phase, the one I'm in now, is acceptance. I'm not okay with what I know. I'm not happy with the situation I find myself in. But I've accepted that this is my reality now. I'm the person who knows. I'm the person who has the footage. I'm the person who has to live with the weight of that knowledge and the risk of what it means. I've accepted that I might never be able to share this with people who could do something about it. I've accepted that the footage might never become public. I've accepted that I might take this knowledge to my grave. But acceptance doesn't mean peace. It just means I've stopped fighting the reality of the situation. It means I've started trying to figure out how to live a life that's worth living while carrying this burden. The practical consequences have been significant. I've lost a career that I loved. I can't go back to forest management work. I can't be in that environment anymore. The job I had is closed to me now. I found new work, but it pays less and it's less fulfilling. I've moved to a different part of the country where I don't have to worry about running into the 3 men again. I've cut off contact with most of my friends because I can't explain why I'm different now, why I've withdrawn, why I don't want to hang out anymore. I've lost relationships because I can't be fully present in them without the knowledge I'm carrying affecting everything. The financial consequences have been significant, too. Moving to a new location was expensive. Breaking my lease was expensive. Finding new work took time and meant lower income. Rebuilding a life costs money. I've gone through most of my savings. I'm not in dire financial straits. But the trajectory has changed. The security I had has been compromised. The psychological consequences are probably the most significant. I have anxiety that I didn't have before. I'm hypervigilant in ways that make normal life difficult. I notice things that most people ignore. I assess threats constantly. I look at people and wonder who they are and whether they're looking for me. I have nightmares sometimes, dreams about the creature or the three men or the forest. I wake up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding. I don't sleep well anymore. Most nights I get maybe 5 or 6 hours of broken sleep, instead of the 7 or 8 I used to get. I've thought about seeing a therapist, and I have seen one, but I can't tell her the real reason I'm struggling. I can't tell her about the footage or the men or the knowledge that's destroying my peace of mind. So I'm in therapy for generalized anxiety and PTSD from a work-related incident, which is technically true even if it's not the whole truth. The therapy helps some, but the fundamental problem can't be addressed. The knowledge that's breaking me is also the knowledge that I need to keep secret. I think about the creature often. I think about what it was doing when I saw it in that clearing. I think about whether it was trying to communicate with me or whether it was just being territorial, or whether it was making a choice about how to handle an encounter with a human in its space. I think about the trail camera footage and the moment when it looked directly at the lens. I try to imagine what it might have been thinking. Does it have language? Does it have culture that's transmitted between individuals? Does it have family relationships? Does it mourn? Does it understand death? Does it have art or music or any of the things we think make life meaningful? I'll probably never know the answers to those questions. The creature has returned to its life in the forest, living in a way that keeps it hidden from human observation. I've been pulled out of that forest into this isolated existence where I carry secrets that are destroying me slowly. But here's what I do know, with absolute certainty. Something is living in that forest. Something intelligent and powerful and aware. Something that has learned how to exist in proximity to human activity without being consistently detected. Something that when it looks at a camera, it does so with intention and awareness. That thing is real. The footage is real. The evidence exists. And I exist too. I'm still here. I'm still carrying the knowledge. And I'm still waiting for the moment when I might find the courage to release it all. What I want people to understand is that there are real consequences to discovery. Real people bearing real costs for knowledge that institutions have decided should remain suppressed. When people hear stories like mine, when they hear about Bigfoot sightings or cryptid encounters or evidence of creatures that shouldn't exist, they often dismiss it as fantasy or misidentification or hoax. They should understand that for people like me, it's not a game. It's a complete disruption of life. It's choosing between personal safety and speaking truth. It's carrying a burden that no one should have to carry alone. The forest where I saw the creature is still being logged. The state is still conducting timber operations in the concrete Darrington unit. The roads are still being maintained. People are still going into that forest for work and for recreation, and somewhere in that forest, the creatures are still living, still hunting, still existing in the spaces between human observation and human understanding. The logging operations haven't driven them out. The human presence hasn't destroyed them. They've learned to navigate in a world where humans are present. They've learned what to avoid and what they can tolerate. If I could go back to June of 2024, if I could go back to that day when I was setting up my camera in the clearing, would I do things differently? Would I not take those photos? Would I not leave the camera running? Would I choose ignorance instead of knowledge? I don't know. Part of me says yes, I would choose differently, because then my life would still be my own. I wouldn't be living in fear. I wouldn't be isolated from my friends and my family. I wouldn't be losing sleep and losing peace of mind. I wouldn't be the person who knows too much and can't speak. But part of me says no. I'm glad I saw it. I'm glad I have the knowledge. I'm glad I know that the world is larger and stranger than we're allowed to admit. Because knowledge is valuable, even when it comes at a cost. Truth is valuable, even when it destroys the comfortable lies we've built around ourselves. I think about what would happen if the footage ever got released to a major news outlet. What if it went public in a way that couldn't be suppressed? What if the scientific community had to confront it? What if the government had to make some kind of official statement? There would be chaos. There would be denial. There would be efforts to discredit the footage. There would be people claiming hoax, claiming CGI, claiming misidentification. The scientific community would demand more evidence. Skeptics would demand independent verification. The initial reaction would be dismissal and denial. But eventually, if the evidence was strong enough and consistent enough, and if enough other people came forward with their own footage or their own stories, the narrative would have to shift. Eventually, the world would have to accept that something like this exists. Eventually, the research would begin. Eventually, the creature would have to be acknowledged and studied and protected. That's what I hope for. That's what keeps me thinking about whether to release the footage. That possibility that eventually the truth will become undeniable and the world will have to change its understanding of the natural world and its place in it. But I also understand why that hasn't happened yet. I understand why anyone who gets footage like this faces pressure to keep it quiet. Because the consequences of truth are often worse than the consequences of silence. Because powerful people prefer a world where things stay hidden. Because the status quo is easier to maintain than the disruption that comes from acknowledging what's real. I've had 2 years to process all of this. 2 years to live with the decision I made to document what I saw, to reach out to my contact, to put the footage in secure storage and to step away from the forest. I've had time to think about whether it was the right choice. Time to wonder if I should do things differently. But I'm still here. The footage is still secure. The knowledge is still in my possession, and I'm still waiting for a moment when the conditions might be right to release it, to change the narrative, to force the world to confront what's real. Until that moment comes, I'll keep living this life. I'll keep doing my job and paying my bills, and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while carrying this extraordinary knowledge. I'll keep having the dreams about the forest. I'll keep waking up at 3 in the morning with my heart pounding. I'll keep being hypervigilant and anxious and withdrawn from the people who used to matter in my life. And I'll keep the footage safe, encrypted, secure, waiting. Because someday, when the time is right, the world needs to know that it's not alone. The world needs to know that the wilderness contains something we never fully understood. The world needs to know that there are intelligent beings living in the forest that have learned to exist outside of human knowledge and understanding. The world needs to know that we share this planet with something profoundly strange and profoundly real. That's what I believe. That's what I know. That's what keeps me going through these difficult years, knowing that the evidence exists and that someday, somehow, it might become public. The forest is still there. The creatures are still living in it. And the truth is still waiting to be discovered by the rest of the world. I want to spend some time talking about what the recovery of the footage would actually entail in practical terms. How would it work? How would the evidence get to the world? What would the process look like? The footage exists in multiple secure locations. My contact has encrypted copies on his server. I have the original camera cards stored in a secure location with dead man's switch instructions. If something happens to me, if I disappear or if I'm found dead, the instructions go into effect. The footage gets released to multiple media outlets simultaneously: the New York Times, the Washington Post, independent journalists who specialize in unusual stories. It all goes public at the same time, so that there's no single point of suppression. But I could also decide to release it myself. I could reach out to my contact and ask him to send me access to the footage. I could upload it to major platforms. I could write a detailed account of what I saw and how I captured it. I could put my name and my face behind the story. I could make myself the public face of the revelation. That option terrifies me, because once I do that, I become the target. I become the person that anyone who wants to suppress this evidence will focus on. I become someone that can be discredited, threatened, disappeared. I would lose any anonymity that currently protects me. The 3 men in my office would know exactly where I am. They would know exactly who I am, and the pressure would increase enormously. But it would also make the story harder to suppress. A specific person making a specific claim, with specific evidence, with specific credentials in forest management and wildlife assessment. That's harder to dismiss than anonymous footage that appears online with no context and no credibility attached. If I became the public face of this, I could explain what I was doing, why I was there, how I collected the evidence, what my background is. I could establish myself as a credible witness, rather than just another cryptid sighting without verification. The scientific community would want to analyze the footage. They would want to examine the technology used, the metadata on the files, the trail camera models and specifications. They would want to interview me extensively. They would want to examine the location and look for additional evidence. A proper scientific investigation could potentially find more physical evidence that would corroborate the footage. Hair samples, scat, tracks, feeding sites, dens. But that scientific investigation would also take time. And during that time, the creatures in the forest would be at risk. If the location became public, if researchers started flooding into the area, the creatures might leave. They might relocate to more remote territory. The breeding population could be disrupted. Their habitat could be damaged by the influx of human activity. So releasing the footage doesn't solve everything. It creates new problems. It potentially puts the creatures themselves at risk. It potentially destroys the very habitat that they depend on for survival. That's part of what's kept me from releasing it. The knowledge that doing so might harm the creatures I've come to respect. The understanding that the best thing for them might be continued secrecy and concealment. That they can only survive if humans don't know about them. That their existence depends on remaining unknown. It's a strange position to be in. To be the person with the knowledge that could change everything, and to be paralyzed by the concern for the creatures that the knowledge reveals. To have the power to disrupt the world's understanding of nature, and to choose not to exercise that power because it might harm the beings that made me reconsider my understanding in the first place. I think about what the creatures would want if they could communicate their preference. Would they want to be known? Would they want to be studied and researched and potentially protected by law? Or would they prefer to remain unknown and unmolested, living in the forest according to their own rules and their own culture? I suspect they would want to remain unknown. If they had the power to prevent humans from discovering them, they seem intelligent enough to be using that power. The fact that they remain largely undetected despite their size and power suggests they don't want to be known. They've learned to navigate a world where humans are increasingly present, and they've figured out how to stay invisible. That's probably by choice, not by accident. But I can't speak for them. I can only speculate about their preferences based on their behavior. And my speculation is that they prefer the current arrangement. They prefer to exist in the knowledge of certain government agencies and certain researchers, but outside the general public awareness. They prefer to be monitored rather than captured. They prefer observation to exposure. That might be my rationalization for keeping the footage secret. That might be me telling myself a story that lets me keep the knowledge I have while not taking action to make it public. But I think it's also true. I think the creatures are better off if this remains unknown to the general population. So I continue to hold the knowledge and wait for something to change, for circumstances to shift in a way that makes revelation necessary rather than optional. For a moment when silence becomes impossible and revelation becomes the only honest choice. I don't know when that moment will come, or if it will come at all. I just know that I'll be carrying this knowledge in the meantime, living a life that's smaller and more constrained than it used to be, but also aware of something that most people never get to know. I'll be the person who knows that the world is stranger and more alive with intelligence than we're allowed to believe. And that knowledge, despite its cost, is something I wouldn't trade for anything. The truth is that I don't know what will happen next. I don't know if the footage will ever become public. I don't know if other people will find evidence of these creatures that will eventually force the scientific community to acknowledge their existence. I don't know if I'll ever have the courage or the right circumstances to release what I'm holding. What I do know is that it's out there. The footage exists. The evidence is real. And somewhere in the North Cascades, in that forest I used to know so well, something intelligent and powerful is still living, still moving through the timber, still hunting, still making its way through a world that mostly doesn't know it exists. And I'll keep my silence until the moment when silence becomes impossible. I'll keep the knowledge secure and safe. I'll keep living this constrained life, knowing that I'm carrying something that could change everything. That's the end of this story. That's where I'm at after 2 years of living with this knowledge. That's what I wanted to share with anyone willing to listen. Thank you for sitting with me through this. Thank you for considering that maybe, just maybe, the world is stranger and more alive than we're typically allowed to believe. I want to be clear about one thing before I finish. This story is true. Every word of it. The dates are accurate. The location coordinates are real. The creatures are real. The trail camera footage is real. The 3 men who came to my office were real. The fear and isolation I've experienced are real. I'm not asking anyone to believe me blindly. I'm just telling you what I experienced and what I've learned. The evidence exists. I know where it is. And I'm living with the knowledge of what I saw. If you work in forestry or wildlife management and you notice something unusual in the forest, if you see tracks that don't match any known species, if you hear vocalizations that don't fit the normal animal sounds, if you notice patterns of predation or behavior that seem to suggest intelligence beyond what we normally associate with animals, then document it, photograph it, keep records. Because what I found is not unique. There are probably more people out there who've seen similar things, more people carrying similar knowledge, more people isolated by the weight of what they know. We don't have to be alone with this. We can acknowledge it to each other. We can recognize that the world contains mysteries. We can admit that our understanding of nature is incomplete. That's all this story is asking. Acknowledgement that something is out there. Recognition that the wilderness is stranger and more alive than we're allowed to believe. Looking back on all of this, looking back on the 2 years since I left the forest and the agency, I realized that the cost of knowledge is more than I initially understood. When I shot that footage on June 22nd in the clearing, I didn't know I was setting myself on a path that would change everything about my life. I thought I was just documenting the forest. I thought I was doing my job. I didn't know that one piece of footage would eventually lead to 3 men in my office. To me, leaving my career. To me, relocating to a different state. to me living with the constant awareness that I have something that people want to suppress. The truth is, I sometimes wish I had never taken that camera into the forest that day. I sometimes wish I had never seen what I saw in the preview screen. I sometimes wish I could go back to when my biggest concern was marking hazard trees and filing reports. That was a simpler life. That was a life where the world made sense, where things fit into categories, where the science was settled and the mysteries were all solved. But I can't go back. I can only move forward with the knowledge I have and the weight it carries. And I can only wait and see what happens next. The creatures are still out there. I'm certain of that. They're still living in the forest. They're still hunting. They're still existing in a space that belongs to them far more than it belongs to any human. And they're still aware that humans are in their territory, still making decisions about how to interact with us, still choosing when to reveal themselves and when to hide. If I ever saw one of those creatures face to face, if I ever came across one in the forest without the barrier of a camera between us, I don't know what would happen. Would it attack? Would it try to communicate? Would it simply walk away the way it did that day on August 20th? I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to find out. But part of me is drawn to that possibility. Part of me wants to go back to that forest and understand. Part of me wants to establish some kind of communication with these beings, to find out if they have language, if they have culture, if they have things they want to tell us about the world. Part of me wants to bridge the gap between what they are and what we are, to find some way of coexisting rather than continuing this strange dance where they hide from us and we search for them. That's probably impossible. But the impossibility doesn't make the desire go away. So I'm still here, still working, still carrying the knowledge, still waiting for the moment when it becomes necessary to release what I've been holding, still hoping that someday, somehow, the world will be ready to acknowledge what's really out there in the wild places. The footage is secure, the evidence is safe, and when the time comes, if the time comes, it will be released. But until then, I keep my silence. I keep my head down. I keep my knowledge close. The North Cascades are still standing. The forest is still growing. And the creatures are still there, living their lives according to their own rules, following their own paths, existing in a way that we're only beginning to understand. That's where the truth lives. That's where the real world exists, beyond the boundaries of what we've documented and categorized and accepted as real. It's out there in the forest, moving through the trees, watching the roads, aware of every human who enters its territory. And someday, that reality is going to break through into the world we live in. Someday the footage will surface. Someday the evidence will become undeniable. Someday the world will have to face the fact that we're not alone in the wilderness, that we never were alone. When that day comes, everything changes. The institutions will have to admit they were wrong. The scientists will have to rewrite their understanding of North American ecology. The government will have to account for how long they've known and why they suppressed the evidence. And people like me will finally be able to stop carrying this weight in silence. Until then, I wait, and I watch, and I hold the knowledge safe. Let me be very specific about what I believe to be true based on what I witnessed. The creatures that live in the North Cascades are not myth or legend or folklore. They are real biological entities. They are large, probably 8 to 10 feet in height, with powerful muscular builds and long arms. They are bipedal, walking upright on 2 legs with a gait that is efficient and powerful. They have hands with distinct fingers and opposable thumbs, or at least significant gripping capability. They have faces that are distinctly non-human, with elongated snouts and prominent brows. They have hair or fur covering their bodies, appearing dark brown or grayish-brown in color. More importantly, they are intelligent. They demonstrate problem-solving ability. They show evidence of tool use. They understand how to hunt selectively, taking the most nutritious parts of their prey first. They recognize human-made objects like cameras and understand what those objects do. They make deliberate choices about interaction with humans, choosing to flee or withdraw rather than engage aggressively. They appear to have social structure, operating in family groups or larger social organizations. They pass knowledge to their young. They have culture. All of this I know with certainty, based on the footage I captured and the observations I made in that forest. None of this is speculation or theory or interpretation. This is what the evidence shows. Now, the question that everyone will ask is why? Why do they stay hidden? Why don't they reveal themselves? Why aren't there more confirmed sightings and footage? And the answer is that they're intelligent enough to understand that revelation would be dangerous for them. They understand that humans with cameras and weapons and technology would pose a threat to their existence. They've learned to navigate a world where human activity is increasing by staying invisible, by moving at night, by avoiding detection. They've learned to live in the margins of human civilization, in the spaces where people don't usually go, in the forest where the darkness and the density of vegetation provides cover. And they've apparently learned to do this for a very long time. How long have they been in the North Cascades? Decades? Centuries? Longer? The indigenous peoples of the region have stories and legends about creatures like this. Were those stories based on observation? Did the original inhabitants of this land know these creatures existed? It's possible. It's even likely. The second question is, what should be done with this knowledge? Should I release the footage? Should I go to the media? Should I contact a university and arrange for scientific study? Each of those options comes with serious risks. Release the footage and I become a target. Go to the media and I face discrediting and dismissal and eventually legal action. Contact a university and I expose researchers and their institutions to the same pressure from the agencies that want this kept quiet. The safest option, the option I've chosen, is silence. Keep the knowledge. Keep the footage secure. Wait for conditions to change. Hope that eventually someone with more resources and more protection finds evidence that confirms what I've found. Hope that eventually the scientific community is forced to confront the reality of these creatures' existence. Hope that eventually this becomes too big to suppress. That's what I'm doing now. That's what I'll be doing for the foreseeable future. Waiting. Watching. Protecting the evidence. Keeping the knowledge safe. If there are other people out there who have seen these creatures or captured evidence of their existence, I want them to know they're not alone. I want them to know that I believe them. I want them to know that the evidence exists and that someday it will come to light. I want them to know that the cost of this knowledge is high, but the importance of the knowledge is higher. And I want to say to the institutions that are suppressing this information, eventually, the truth will surface. Eventually, the evidence will become undeniable. Eventually, you'll have to account for your choices to keep this hidden. The day of reckoning is coming, whether you like it or not. Until then, the forest keeps its secrets, and I keep mine. There's something I haven't talked about much, and that's the human cost. Not just my cost, but the cost to others. My supervisor, Carol, she knew something was wrong when those 3 men showed up. She knew I was in trouble, but she couldn't do anything about it. She couldn't help me without putting herself at risk, and I couldn't tell her the truth without implicating her in knowing too much. That's a kind of damage that goes beyond career interruption. That's damage to relationships, to trust, to the normal human connections that make life bearable. My contact, the wildlife biologist who accepted the footage for safekeeping, he's taken on a serious responsibility. He's protecting evidence of something that powerful people want suppressed. If this ever goes public and he's identified as the person who holds the footage, his life will be disrupted too. His career will be affected. He'll face pressure and legal action and harassment. I put him in that position. That's a debt I carry. My family doesn't know what happened. They know I left the DNR and changed careers and relocated. They know something happened that I'm not comfortable discussing. But they don't know the full truth. And I can't tell them because that would make them party to the secret. That would put them in the position of knowing something dangerous and not being able to talk about it. So I keep them at a distance, and that creates a kind of alienation that's hard to describe. These are the real costs. Not the money, though, that's an issue too. The real costs are the human connections that are strained or broken, the relationships that can't be fully authentic because I can't be fully honest about what's happened to me and why I'm different now. But I would do it again, despite everything, despite the fear and the isolation and the alienation from the people I care about. I would do it again. Because the truth matters. Because knowledge matters. Because refusing to suppress evidence of something extraordinary is more important than personal comfort. That's the choice I made, and I have to live with the consequences of it. Now, as we come to the end of this account, I want to say something directly to anyone who might be listening. The world is stranger than you've been told. Wilderness contains mysteries that haven't been solved. There are intelligent beings living on this planet that the scientific community refuses to acknowledge. And there are powerful organizations working to keep that information suppressed. But suppression never works forever. Eventually, the truth finds a way to emerge. Eventually, the evidence becomes too overwhelming to deny. Eventually, the world has to wake up to reality. When that happens, when the creatures of the North Cascades and the other wild places are finally acknowledged to exist, the world will change. The way we think about conservation will change. The way we treat wilderness will change. The way we understand our place in nature will change. And that change will be worth the price that people like me have paid to make it happen. I don't know when that time will come. I don't know what will trigger it, but I know it will come. And when it does, I'll be here, waiting, watching, ready for the moment when this knowledge finally becomes public. Until then, I remain Dale. I remain the forestry worker who saw something impossible and chose to protect that knowledge rather than exploit it. I remain the man who carries the weight of truth in a world built on lies. And somewhere in the North Cascades, the creatures remain in the forest, living, hunting, existing according to their own rules and their own understanding of the world, watching the roads, aware of the trucks, waiting for the day when humans finally acknowledge their existence. That day is coming. I'm certain of it. The footage exists. The evidence exists. And the truth cannot stay hidden forever. In closing, I want to be clear about what this story is. It's a true account of events that happened to me over the course of several months in 2024. It's documentation of evidence that I captured with my own equipment. It's a record of my response to that evidence and the consequences that followed from that response. It's not a work of fiction. It's not speculation or theory. It's a factual accounting of what I observed, what I documented, and what happened afterward. The creatures are real. The footage is real. The 3 men in my office were real. Everything in this account is based on actual events that occurred. That's what I wanted to make absolutely clear before we finish. This is not entertainment. This is not creative writing. This is testimony from someone who has seen something extraordinary and is finally choosing to speak about it. Thank you for listening to this account. Thank you for considering the possibility that the world contains mysteries we haven't yet solved. And thank you for keeping an open mind about what might be living in the wild places we think we know. The truth is out there. The evidence exists. And someday, the world will know. I want to take one final moment to address something that might be lingering in your mind as you finish this story. You might be wondering whether you can trust what I'm telling you, whether I'm being truthful, whether everything in this account really happened the way I've described. I understand that skepticism. I would be skeptical, too, if I were hearing this story for the first time. A man claims to have filmed a previously unknown creature. He claims that government agents showed up at his office. He claims he's been living with this knowledge in secret for 2 years. It sounds like the kind of story that people tell when they want attention or when they've been caught up in a conspiracy theory. But I'm not looking for attention. I'm not promoting a book or a documentary or a theory. I'm simply telling what I know to be true based on my own experience. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that what I'm describing could be true. I'm asking you to keep an open mind about what might exist in the wild places of this world. The footage exists. I know it does because I shot it. I've seen it. I've analyzed it. I know what's on it. Whether you believe me or not doesn't change the reality of that footage's existence. And that's really what matters. Not whether you believe me, not whether you think I'm credible. What matters is that the evidence exists, and evidence eventually speaks for itself. So that's where I leave you. With the knowledge that something real is out there in the forest, with the hope that someday that reality will become public, with the understanding that the truth, no matter how long it's suppressed, eventually finds a way to emerge. Thank you for hearing my story. Thank you for considering the possibility of what I've described. The world is stranger than we know. Before you leave this story behind, I want you to remember one thing. Everything you think you know about the natural world might be incomplete. Everything you've been told about what exists and what doesn't exist in our forests and wild places might be based on incomplete information. There might be things out there that haven't been formally discovered by science yet. There might be creatures living in the spaces between what we know and what we don't know. There might be mysteries waiting in the forest for us to finally pay attention to them. Open your eyes to the possibility of the unknown. Keep your mind receptive to evidence that doesn't fit the standard narrative. Remember that what is unknown to science is not the same as what does not exist. The creatures are real. The forest is real. The mystery is real. And one day, everyone will know. This is my account. This is my testimony. This is what I know to be true. I am Dale. I work in forestry. I saw something impossible in the forest. I documented it. I protected the evidence. And now I'm telling the world what I know. The rest is up to you. I have nothing left to add. I have told you everything I know. I have shared everything I have witnessed. The rest is silence and the waiting and the hope that someday this knowledge becomes public and changes everything we thought we knew about the world. The forest keeps its secrets, but one day those secrets will be revealed. And when they are, the creatures of the North Cascades will finally be acknowledged. The evidence will finally be seen, and the world will never be the same. That is my faith. That is my hope. That is what keeps me going through the days. I want to address one more thing before we truly finish. Over these past 2 years, I've thought constantly about what would happen if I ever encountered one of these creatures again, face to face. No camera between us, no distance. What would I do? Would I run? Would I try to communicate? Would I stand my ground and demand answers to the questions that have been consuming me? The truth is, I don't know. Fear is a powerful force. Self-preservation is a powerful instinct. I tell myself I would try to communicate, try to establish some kind of understanding. But faced with an 8-foot-tall bipedal creature that could kill me with ease, would I actually do that? Or would I panic? Would I try to flee? Would I reach for my sidearm in desperation? I don't know the answer to that question. I hope I never have to find out. But I think about it constantly. I think about what I would say if I could speak to these creatures. I think about what I would want them to know. That I respect their existence, that I'm not trying to harm them, that I believe they deserve to live in peace without human interference or persecution, that the world should acknowledge their right to exist and thrive in the forests that have been their home. for generations. If there's any message I could send to the creatures of the North Cascades, it would be this: I see you, I know you're there, and I'm not coming back to invade your space or capture you or prove your existence for the sake of human curiosity. You can live in peace. You have my silence and my protection. That's a promise I've made to myself and to them.